The pale light of the system's sun was just beginning to creep over the curve of the alien world, casting long shadows across the plains below. On that surface, a million-strong army stirred. They were the vanguard of the Xylos Dominion, a reptilian species that had carved a bloody path through a dozen star systems. Their conquest was methodical, their military might absolute. They believed in the shock and awe of a dawn assault, the sun at their backs blinding their enemies as their drop pods rained fire from the sky. Today, that enemy was Earth. On the command deck of the Dominion Dreadnought Scythe of Resolve, Overlord Karax watched the tactical displays with predatory satisfaction. The blue-green marble of humanity's world rotated serenely below, oblivious. His intelligence had been clear. Humanity was a fractured, an impulsive species, prone to internal conflict and slow to unite. Their fleets were a patchwork of national pride, their technology derivative. They would be crushed before their midday meal. "All batteries charged for orbital bombardment," Karax hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air. "Prepare the first wave of drop ships. We launch at local sunrise." A subordinate, its scales a duller green, hesitated. "Overlord, our long-range sensors are picking up unusual energy readings from the planet's orbital plane, concentrated near the Lagrange points." Karax dismissed the concern with a flick of his clawed hand. "Debris, perhaps an old station. Focus on the primary target." He turned his three-eyed gaze back to the viewing port, picturing the terror that would soon grip the cities below. The plan was perfect, and it had worked 100 times before. The countdown reached 0. The surface of the planet below them was now a brilliant line of gold and orange. "Launch all forward batteries," Karax commanded. And nothing happened. He stared at the display. The weapons were still charged, the targeting solutions locked. But the firing order had not been executed. A cold dread, one he hadn't felt in decades, slithered into his gut. "Report!" he snarled. "Overlord," the sensor operator stammered, his voice trembling. "The energy readings. They've spiked. They're not debris. They're ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They're decloaking all around us." On the main view screen, the stars began to shimmer and warp. Space itself seemed to tear as one by one, the seemingly empty void disgorged warships. They weren't the sleek, a unified fleet the Xylos had expected. They were a chaotic menagerie of different designs, a floating museum of naval architecture from a dozen different human nations and private corporations. There were the angular, stealthy destroyers of the Pan-Asian Coalition, their hulls painted with intricate digital camouflage. There were the massive, slab-sided carriers of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, their flight decks bristling with atmospheric and void superiority fighters. The hulking utilitarian ships of the United Nations Space Command, covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes, moved into formation, acting as the fleet's nervous system. And holding the center, dwarfing even the Xylos Dreadnought, was a vessel that seemed less like a warship and more like a mobile shipyard or a deep space construction platform. And it was the UNSC Hephaestus, its hull scarred not by battle, but by decades of building and repairing everything humanity had ever sent into the black. The human fleet had not just been waiting, they had been patiently, silently, forming a net. They hadn't detected the Xylos fleet at the edge of the system because they were already here, waiting for it. Karax finally found his voice. "It's a trap! How? How did they know?" The answer came not from his bridge, but flooding across every communication channel the Xylos had. It wasn't a threat or a demand for surrender. It was a simple, calm voice, speaking perfect Xylos. "Xylos Dominion vessel, this is Fleet Admiral Eliza Vance of the United Nations Space Command. We have been monitoring your approach for 3 standard weeks. that you are currently surrounded by the entirety of Earth's orbital defense fleet. Your weapon systems are being targeted by 1,000,000-point defense cannons and 1,000 spinal rail guns. Any hostile action will be met with overwhelming force. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded. You have 5 minutes to comply. On the bridge of the Scythe of Resolve, silence reigned. The perfect plan, the surprise assault at sunrise, had been rendered meaningless. The sun was rising on their target. Yes. But humanity had not been waiting for it to wake up. They had been standing guard in the dark, ready to greet the dawn on their own terms. The hunters had become the hunted before a single shot could be fired. Over the next 5 minutes, Carax's world crumbled. He saw the cold, hard data. His ship was outgunned 10-1, and his dropships were sitting ducks. The human fleet, for all its chaotic appearance, moved with a coordination that spoke of countless drills and a unified command structure. It wasn't a desperate last stand, it was an execution. With 30 seconds left on the clock, Carax powered down his drives. He was a conqueror, but he was not a fool. To fight was to die for nothing. As the first human boarding shuttles latched onto his ship's hull, he finally understood. They had not underestimated humanity's technology or its military. They had underestimated its paranoia, its history, and its fundamental understanding of survival. For a species that had spent its entire existence looking up at the stars and wondering if something was looking back, the first rule of defense was to never be caught by surprise. The assault was launched at sunrise. But for humanity, sunrise was just another hour of the watch. They had already been on duty for a very long time. The boarding was swift and brutal in its efficiency. The Xylos soldiers, bred for open warfare and terror tactics, found themselves completely outmatched in the close, labyrinthine corridors of their own ship. The human boarding parties didn't charge in with blaring war cries. They moved in disciplined squads, their powered armor making their movements unnaturally fluid and silent. They used non-lethal suppression fields and targeted disabling shots. They weren't there to massacre a defeated foe. They were there to secure the prize. Carax was escorted to his own bridge, now filled with human soldiers. He was an imposing figure, easily 8 feet tall, with muscle and natural armor. He stood before Admiral Vance, and who barely reached his chest. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt small. The Admiral looked at him not with hatred or triumph, but with a clinical weariness. She gestured to a screen displaying the Xylos fleet, now sitting dead in space, surrounded by the human armada. "Your fleet is disabled," she stated, her voice even. "A low-frequency resonance pulse was transmitted through your hull during boarding. It's non-lethal, but it's effectively paralyzed every piece of unshielded electronics on your ships. Your weapons, your navigation, your life support, all running on backup power now. My engineers are restoring minimal life support as we speak." Carax's mind raced. A weapon they hadn't even detected, a method of attack that required no kinetic impact, no energy beam. It was a surgical strike, designed for capture. It tells us nothing. Capturing your ships and tells us nothing. Capturing your ships and your crew gives us your star charts, your fleet compositions, your homeworld coordinates, your political structure, your strengths, and your weaknesses. It gives us knowledge. And knowledge, Overlord, is the only real currency out here. She turned to one of her officers. "Begin the full debriefing protocols. Separate the bridge crew first." She looked back at Carax. "You'll be treated with dignity, as required by the Geneva Conventions and their subsequent spacefaring amendments. We are not you." In the following days, Carax learned the true nature of his enemy. He was kept in a comfortable, if secure, compartment on the Hephaestus. And he was given food and water. He was allowed to exercise, and he was debriefed extensively. He expected torture, coercion. He got historians, sociologists, and psychologists. They didn't want his military secrets. They wanted to understand his culture. They wanted to know why the Xylos conquered. Was it resources? Population pressure? A religious mandate? A biological imperative? He found himself talking, not from fear, but from a strange sense of fascination. These humans were not a monolith. The officers from the coalition argued with the officers from NATO over interrogation techniques. The UNSC officers mediated. They were a chaotic, argumentative, and deeply curious species. They reminded him of hatchlings, constantly questioning everything. One evening, a young human lieutenant, a historian, came to talk to him. And he showed Karax images of humanity's past. Vast wars that had consumed entire continents, genocides, the constant, brutal struggle for power. Karax felt a flicker of recognition. This was the behavior of a young, aggressive species, just like his own. "You understand war," Karax said, gesturing at the images. "You are like us." The lieutenant smiled, a strange expression on his face. "That's the past, Overlord. Or at least, that's what we're trying to make the past. See, we learned the hard way that endless war doesn't get you anywhere. It just makes graves. We almost wiped ourselves out a few times. After the last big one, the Third World War, we finally figured it out. We had a choice. Keep fighting over the scraps of a dead world, or work together to reach for something better. We chose the stars." He pointed out a small viewport showing the Earth below. "Look at it. From up here, you can't see the borders. You can't see the lines we drew in the dirt. You just see one world, our world. And when you see that, you realize that anyone who comes from another star is an outsider. And when an outsider shows up with an army, all those old arguments we used to have, they just don't seem to matter anymore." Karax finally understood the horrifying truth. Humanity wasn't united by a single government or a single ideology. They were united by a shared history of self-destruction. They had looked into the abyss and seen their own reflection. The paranoia that had led them to build this fleet wasn't born of fear of the unknown. It was born of a deep and abiding knowledge of what they themselves were capable of. And they had prepared for an enemy like the Xylos because, in a sense, they had already been that enemy. They had conquered their own world, and the scars had taught them how to build a better one, and they were prepared to defend it from anyone who hadn't learned the same lesson. Weeks later, a decision was made. The captured Xylos ships were repaired, not for war, but for travel. Karax was brought before Admiral Vance one last time. The captured overlord stood tall, awaiting his fate. "We're letting you go," Vance said simply. Karax was stunned. "Go? To a prison colony? No, home. We're giving you back your ships, your crew, and enough supplies for the journey. You will return to the Dominion." "This is a trick," Karax hissed. "You will follow us, find our worlds, and destroy us." Vance shook her head. "And if we wanted to find your worlds, we'd just ask. Your navigational data was on your ship's computers. We already know where your core systems are. We're not coming. That's not the trick." She walked closer to him, her voice dropping. "The trick is this, Overlord. You will return to your people, a defeated fleet, captured and released by a species you were sent to conquer. You will tell them everything. You will tell them about our fleet, our weapons, our unity. You will tell them that we knew you were coming before you even left your space. You will tell them that we chose to let you live." She let the words sink in. The Dominion runs on fear and the myth of invincibility. We just shattered that myth. We didn't just defeat a fleet. We defeated an idea. Now you have to go home and live with that. Your council, your emperor, your people. They will have to decide what to do with a neighbor who could have annihilated them but chose to show mercy. Some will call for revenge, a foolish, suicidal charge. Others will call for caution. And while they argue, while their perfect war machine is paralyzed by doubt and fear, they will leave us alone. That's all we've ever wanted. Karak stood in silence, the full devastating weight of her words pressing down on him. The humans hadn't won a battle. They had won a war without firing a shot in anger. They had turned his greatest strength, the fear he inspired, into his species' greatest weakness. They had sent him home not as a conqueror, but as a living, breathing symbol of their power and their terrifying restraint. As his repaired ship, the Scythe of Resolve, now a ghost of its former pride, began its long journey back to Dominion space, Karak stared at the receding blue dot of Earth. He thought of the human lieutenant's words. They had looked at their own violent past and chosen to build something new. They had looked at the darkness of space and decided to stand guard, not to conquer, but to protect. And in doing so, they had achieved something the Xylo's Dominion, for all its might, never could. They had made an enemy think twice. They had secured the peace. The assault was launched at sunrise, but for humanity, sunrise was just a reminder that the night was over, and they had survived it once again. They were already standing guard for the next one.